Seeking Philosophical Meaning in a Universe Without Purpose, My Mid-20s Ruminations Re-Analysed. Bruce Charlton. In my mid-20s I graduated from medical school and started work, at first as a doctor, then in research for a doctorate. These were years in which I experienced the power of that alienation so characteristic of modernity. And, as always in this life, fundamental problems to do with ultimate purpose and how my own life ought to be orientated, was mixed up with the daily fatigue and of long working hours doing externally dictated tasks, and the apparent gloomy prospect of more of the same for some decades to come. I sought answers in philosophy, and engaged a lot of brooding on philosophical matters, a lot more brooding than reading. What I mean is that I thought a lot about relatively very few concepts, sayings and phrases. These few stimuli came from philosophers with an existential orientation, perhaps especially the Germanic thinkers Wittgenstein and Heidegger. Thus I never read these authors widely, nor studied them in a scholarly or rigorous way, but was struck by a few sayings and aspects of what I regarded as biographical aspects, and this was mixed up with similarly selective bits of some German fictional works such as some of Hermann Hesse and Thomas Mann. In sum, I was working in the tradition of German Romanticism which I already knew, more thoroughly, from classical composers, especially Weber and Wagner. I was, and long remained, a mainstream scientistic atheist. However, both Wittgenstein and Heidegger seemed to reach their deepest bedrock in the yearning or hope for a God as the necessary prerequisite for a life of meaning, a life of engagement with the world and other people, rather than this miserable situation of being stuck in the nutshell of my own thinking, and looking out. Hamlet was another big factor in this. And this began a long period of thinking about God, and essentially this was God, not Jesus Christ. At any rate, I developed a half-fascination for monasticism, which was, again, something I thought about a good deal more than I researched. What is interesting and significant in retrospect was that I never thought seriously about God as creator because I never stopped regarding the universe as, obviously, so it seemed, having arisen due to psy-ops. Instead I was thinking of God as a potential provider of meaning in a universe that was going nowhere in particular. I was seeking meaning in life, in a reality without purpose or direction, seeking a meaningful life and human society in a universe that was utterly indifferent to meaning. Unsurprisingly, this led to a kind of rooted pessimism, an ultimate bleakness to my outlook, and an suspicion that the best hope for life was not to be aware of the bottom line. I think this may have been the basis of my interest in monasticism, which was combined with a similar fascination with Zen Buddhism. In both instances the idea I had was, something like, that the environment and discipline of a meditative and ascetic life might have been effective in providing a convincing illusion, in effect a delusion, of meaning and engagement in a situation in which that meaning was encapsulated by the circumstance of meditation and monasticism. It seemed, and I may have been right, that this fitted with the extreme gloom and near despair that permeated Wittgenstein and Heidegger. The idea that a rigorous philosophy would ultimately reach bottom in a kind of palliative psychotherapy, perhaps on a societal scale. Heidegger, in particular, seemed to be hoping that society would reinstate a God who would cure our modern malaise and alienation by reinstating a divine underpinning for life. And having done so, would then forget that this had been manufactured, so that everybody would then live as if there was a God, and thereby become able to have a kind of purpose and contentment, even though the deepest philosophers or historians might know that the whole edifice of meaning had actually been constructed by men and had no basis in ultimate reality. In sum, the best hope for me, for other people, for society in general, was a convincing and universal delusion of God as the underwriter of the best possible human and societal life, one that might energize, direct and coordinate its members. I was more or less stuck in this picture of reality, and what kept me stuck was, I now believe, in retrospect, the elimination of metaphysics from philosophy, the elimination of awareness that our ultimate and bottom line convictions are, and must be, assumptions, and were not, and cannot be, derived from experience or evidence. Once I had realized that my picture of a physics-rooted universe was an assumption and not a fact, this was the key that eventually led to a rational and rigorous way out from this trap of desiring a life based on benign delusion. Of course, the miseries of life don't go away, and can still overwhelm, no matter what the metaphysical assumptions. But it is of immense value to know that the meaninglessness and ultimate, bottom line, sense of alienation and meaninglessness that pervade adult life in modernity, is a self-inflicted problem. Since we are, ourselves and personally, albeit by passive, mostly unconscious, absorption of prevalent social mores, the cause of the problem, we ourselves can be the solution. This could be summarized as the belief that in a purposeless, meaningless, physics-made universe, all purpose and meaning must be delusional. However, our private and personal subjective delusions are too weak to convince and motivate us, since they are continually being contradicted by the people and circumstances around us. Therefore, the only sufficiently effective delusion is a group-originated and group-reinforced delusion that can be experienced as external and objective. Therefore, our best hope is that such a dominating societal group delusion may arise and persist, somehow. SSPX, Successful Anti-Christian / Anti-Roman Catholic Psyops. Bruce Charlton. I have seldom seen more of a blog blitz on synlogos.org than the past few days of Roman Catholic bloggers debating the Pope's actions towards SSPX, the Society of St. Pius X. It's all a bit sad, because although the SSPX deserve defending as a lesser evil in context of the global decline of Christian churches and the specific context of the Roman Catholic Church, SSPX are in fact, and in the medium-long term, a hopeless cause. But the whole framing of the debate seems to have had the effect of making the SSPX into either the cause of Roman Catholic decline, or else the great hope of an Roman Catholic revival, neither of which is the case. It is a pity that, yet again, the mainstream media and the system have spectacularly succeeded in creating a false dichotomy with a forced choice, hijacking the agenda, misdirecting Christian energies, and obscuring what really needs to be thought about seriously and as deeply as possible. And a good deal of rigorous and honest thought is required, before any debate can do good rather than harm. The decline of the ideal of worship and obedient service. Bruce Charlton. It is striking, to me, how the ideal values of worship and obedient service have declined to feebleness, or else to a legalism of worship and obedient service that disguises a pleasure-seeking / fear-motivated loyal conformity to societal power. Worship of and obedience to God are the Old Testament ideal that permeate much of the Bible, including much of the New Testament such as the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. And this was, in most stable and effective Christian societies, transferred to a monarch, whether temporal and or spiritual, or both, who would himself be motivated by the same ideal. If I think back about 30 and plus years, this broad framework of W&O was still, sometimes and somewhat but in a valued way, working for me, although on in rather specific times and places and occasions. What characterized such a situation was a sense of magical enchantment, a positive connection to past, place, institution, and others present. But it was already clear that this ideal had not just lost its appeal to most people, most of the time, who were simply bored by such things. And there was indeed a reaction against it, such that an atmosphere of scornful mockery and embarrassment was becoming dominant whenever worship and obedient service was apparent or advocated, or against those who were more that way inclined. Also, those who most vehemently advocated that worship and obedience was a good, or essential, basis for the good life, were nearly always being dishonest, they were just using this value system for their own, and often sordid, self-gratification and benefit. Of course, this decline and inversion is in some important and valuable ways a subtraction from life. This is why people like me fought against it. Yet it is also a fact of life that needs to be acknowledged, as is the requirement that something is needed to replace it as a source of motivation and enchantment, if not of social cohesion. Because it seems increasingly clear that appeals to, or enforcement of, social cohesion nowadays is rooted in negative and evil purposes, for instance when prepping nations and institutions for pursuit of an evil war, or an evil strategy. In other words, appeals to, de facto, worship and obedience, whether in religion or in secular life, the seeking of increased energy and motivation for societal groupings, is used for the purposes of lawful evil. This seems inevitable when the people involved have themselves, and en masse rejected the reality of the Christian God and divine creation. How can people be corralled into pursuing a truly good purpose, when they deny the very reality of good purpose in the universe? And yet, we must have something. If not worship and obedience, then something else, because the alternative is despair. And then either an obedience based on mere coping and survivalism, chosen slavery, or else here and now selfishness, and indifference to consequences, psychopathy. Surely this is an unavoidable task for everyone. And a task where objective external assistance from a societal source cannot be expected, and where whatever answer we may find will inevitably be partial, temporary, and perhaps private and personal. For me, vital clues are the insight that God most desires of us is not worship and obedience, but instead a chosen, committed, and loving friendship type of relationship, analogous to that which forms the basis of a shared and harmonious, purposive living, and, sometimes, temporarily, and imaginably, characterizes the best of family life and marriage. However, the reassurance we have as Christians is that whatever we actually achieve is less important than knowing what we most need. Sincerely attempting not successfully accomplishing our ideals, is actually the basis of good living now, and salvation to come. A Christian Universalist. William Wildblood. I am sometimes asked, what are you? Meaning, am I a Christian, a Buddhist, theosophist, esotericist or pagan of some kind, whatever it might be? I always find it difficult to give a proper answer to this question, since in a way I am all of these and yet none. That is to say, I have learned from many spiritual traditions but cannot fully align myself with any of them, because if I did I would then have to take spiritual truth at second hand and be bound by the particular form I had chosen. I am well aware there are some who would consider this spiritual arrogance, but it is not. It simply means that truth is beyond form, any form, and to commit yourself to a religious form means you are stepping down from direct interaction with truth. You then have to accept the restrictions of that form and be limited by its concepts and definitions. You may say you are aware of these and so escape their dominion, but that cannot be the case if you really do believe in the religion as it presents itself. And if you don't wholly believe, why bother with it at all other than as a guide? I take several things as guides but do not see any as a destination. I am always careful to stress that this may not have been the case in the past, but it very much is so in our time, when all religions have lost spiritual authority and power, and all have become exteriorized versions of themselves with their inner energies increasingly draining away. So now, if forced to describe myself as something, I might say I am a Christian Universalist, while all the time realizing that is just a phrase which doesn't mean anything much. But if someone wants a label, that's as good as any. I absolutely believe in Christ as the central figure in the human spiritual drama, and that the Christian religion expresses something real and profound about him even though we still do not understand the fullness of it. However, I also believe that Christ as the spiritual commander-in-chief of humanity can operate through different outlets. In this sense, he is like the central hub of a wheel and there are various spokes that go out from him to humanity positioned at different points around the edge of the wheel. That's a clumsy analogy because some of these spokes go directly to him while others only go part of the way and would then have to join another spoke to progress to Christ, complete alignment with whom is the fulfillment of the spiritual path. Still, I hope you get the idea. Not all the spiritual spokes lead to Christ, but he can use some that don't to get an individual some of the way. I see Christ as the goal for all humanity, but there are different paths to him, some direct and some circuitous but still leading to him at the end if followed right. I certainly would not say all paths lead to Christ because that isn't true and most don't, but there are more than just one. At the same time, I would also say that to reach the inner reality of Christ means going beyond all outer paths and treading the inner way, and that is the same path for everyone. Christian Universalist it has to be then, but don't take that as saying everyone is saved regardless of their path. Outer paths may vary in their form, but the inner quality of each one must have the same core for the path to be effective. The core is the love of God, which means true God, not some particular image that has been constructed by man, of which there are numerous. The best image of God is Christ, as he is the image in which God is most truly revealed. Censorship, excuses, value inversion, why suppression of truth is not defeated by true information, the example of genocide. Bruce Charlton. There is a very strong tendency among anti-establishment radicals, and indeed among establishment-supporting radicals, the legions of deluded leftists, that true information can, and shall, defeat the distortions of censorship and untruthful propaganda. That is the theory, but you may have noticed that this does not actually happen. Some fact or facts are being suppressed by those with power, and it is claimed that if only these were made publicly and widely available, then the real, and evil, nature of those in power would be revealed, people would cease to believe and support them, and a stop would be put to this kind of wrongdoing. But mostly this does not happen. Real facts get revealed, or something more like facts than previously was the case, but the desired outcome goes not happen, as revealed by genocide. Genocide could roughly be defined as the i.e. purposive annihilation, for example death or and exclusion displacement, for example ethnic cleansing, of a culture and a people. And, whether or not this is correct, genocide is widely agreed to be the worst evil of all, but in practice, especially when genocide was done, or alleged to have been done, to left-approved groups and categories. It is the supposed prevention of genocidal cultural exclusion/annihilation that is regarded as a bottom-line justification for several of the major leftist strategies of recent decades, for example anti-racism, feminism, and sexual orientation radicalism. Yet, genocide is, of course, a core activity of the dominating atheist left-West establishment leadership class, in the past, recently, and at present. The explicit and multiple examples of so-called regime change imposed all around the world, and attempted far more widely, are often the tip of an iceberg of longer-term, and often highly successful, strategy of cultural annihilation and absorption. This is culturally and spiritually genocidal, although this may not become physical annihilation unless the genocide absorption is resisted. For example, the threat of physical genocide coerces the imposition of cultural genocide. So what are the lines of defense of evils, such as genocide? 1. Censorship, there is no evil. 2. Excuses, the evil is real but justified, expedient for some greater good. 3. Value inversion, evil becomes good. 1. Censorship. The first line of defense for genocidal activity is censorship, cover-up, suppression of evidence, a denial that it has happened, and still is happening, and is deliberate, strategic, top-down, and mandatory. But in spiritual terms, a wholly successful denial is almost worthless. Because what people do not know, they do not excuse or support, and people may remain good-orientated, but merely ignorant. Therefore, the more spiritually orientated forms of strategic evil will ensure that the truth gets out, somehow, somewhere. Such that some kind of evidence for genocide having happened or ongoing, will leak, or be discovered by some investigator, and this evidence will be, less or more widely, enabled to spread. 2. Excuses. The second line of defense, when people discover, and are at least somewhat convinced by, evidence of our side committing some evil such as genocide, is to excuse it. To say yes, this is evil, but it is necessary. For instance, to acknowledge that we are doing evil, even genocidal evil, but that this is necessary for some larger, more vital, and positively moral purpose. Perhaps that we have been compelled to do it by circumstances, out of our control, perhaps it needs to be done in retaliation for greater evils, perhaps of the same kind, done to us by them. The idea is Thar Tevel can, and should, but used against evil, the Boromir strategy. But, whatever the excuse and how it is done, this excusing of evil is a step on the road to spiritual corruption, and distortion of values. 3. Value inversion. The end stage of value inversion, when that which was regarded as the greatest evil, is now instead understood to be a good thing, has been reached in at least 2 instances known to me recently. This has been evident from government officials and the mass media bragging about genocidal activities and intent, and positive reporting of strategies to continue and extend this. As another common example, filmed evidence of the doing of sadistic atrocities has been disseminated by the people who did them. And the loop of evil is closed by a positive public reaction to such communications. In other words, what was a negative value, indeed for many people the most negative value, has been inverted into a positively approved and morally admirable action. So, the idea that overcoming apparent suppression and censorship, by revealing evidence and facts, actually achieves the extremity of moral corruption in those, apparently many people, often a significant majority, for whom partisan loyalty to a cause, ideology, or religion, is more powerful than their understanding, discernment and basis for choosing between good and evil. This applies across the broad range of moral issues, from war and war crimes, to social categories of sex, race, religion, to particular behaviors of particular people in such areas of sex, violence, theft, fraud, bribery, nepotism, or whatever. Our society in the West is already so deeply corrupted, so completely immoored from any strong basis in values, that revelations of evil and wrongdoing are usually, in practice, spiritually counterproductive. Does history unfold according to a plan? Bruce Charlton. Does history unfold according to a plan? I think not. But history does have a direction, and this direction is a bottom-up kind of thing. I mean the shape of history as a consequence of the cumulative development of individual beings. And that development of beings is a matter of increasing consciousness. God does indeed want beings to increase in intelligence, because it is one motivation of God that beings should come up to God's creative level, to become divine friends, and colleagues of God, in the work of creation, and that entails increased consciousness. beings begin as mostly spontaneous, relatively unconscious, and with largely automatic behaviors in response to stimuli, like those beings we usually classify as mineral, and that people usually claim are non-alive. However, all beings have embryonic free agency and consciousness, as the basis for what comes later. But as each being develops, matures, awareness and freedom and choice can only increase. In the spiritual realm this is obviously true. This, despite that in this mortal incarnated subset of the spiritual which we term the material, everything tends towards destruction, i.e. entropy. The development of consciousness gives direction to history because it is ultimately irreversible. Once there has been development, it cannot be undone. A being cannot revert to an earlier stage of its development. A baby can become a child can, and in the long term does, tend to develop towards adolescence and maturity. This directionality may be slowed, but cannot be stopped, and the process is cumulative, irreversible. Once a development of consciousness has happened in a being, that has been permanently added, and cannot be subtracted. Such directionality true even in the temporary conditions of mortal life, despite that the developments are lost to disease, degeneration and eventual death. An adult who has lost the developments of consciousness, intelligence, freedom may be a sick adult, but does not thereby become a child. So history, the shape of history, is an accumulation of the effects and interactions of more and more beings, getting more and more developed, with effects that are irrevocable. What history is not, is a top-down shaping of the lives and experiences and learnings of beings. We, as individuals, are not being fitted into history. On the contrary, history is emerging from the multitude of our lives. And that is a clue to how we can, and ought to, influence history. Too many mainstream Orthodox Christians are universalists when it comes to the resurrection of damnation. Bruce Charlton. There is a sentence in the fourth gospel that contradicts the argument and multiple statements of the rest of the gospel, and which I assume was a later and alien addition. But which, with perhaps a terrible and malignant inevitability, became standard Orthodox compulsory dogma in many Christian churches, at least among theologians.
John 5:28. Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming, in the which all that are in the grave shall hear his voice, and shall come forth, they that have done good, unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil, unto the resurrection of damnation.
The alienness of this passage is that, through the rest of the gospel, it is evident that resurrection is a good thing, good news, the great gift that Jesus offers to all men who follow him. This is the real Christianity, one that recognizes that Jesus offered a great gift. A gift that any mortal man, whether he be good or bad, as evaluated by this world, and after all we are all sinners. Sinners both in the primary sense that we all shall die, and the secondary sense that nobody lives in full harmony with divine creation. Thus, a great gift that all may choose to accept, by following Jesus through death into resurrection and heaven. What I regard as true Christianity, takes up Jesus' many statements in the fourth gospel, and its overall argument, that has resurrection linked with heaven. Resurrection is the needful transformation by which we are born again in a form suitable for heaven. So, salvation properly means saving us from death, and the default fate of becoming ghostly spirits, barely ourselves. Saving us into an eternal life in heaven. Yet here, in the above quoted sentence, there is raised the spectre that Jesus' work was to raise the barely conscious gibbering ghosts of the underworld Sheol into an everlasting incarnated state in which they would suffer the eternal torment of hell. Add to this horror, the statements in some other books of the New Testament that only few, probably the very few who have done good to a sufficient degree, can or shall ever attain the resurrection of life. And we get that truly horrible depiction of Jesus Christ as cosmic sadist that is so vehemently insisted up and enforced by so many churches. I mean the common and horribly inverted picture of a Jesus whose great work as a savior was to implement a system of alleged salvation, by which the majority of men, probably a very large majority, were resurrected from death in order that they could be tortured forever. By such means, a large number of self-identified Christians, past and present, chose to make themselves into Universalists. But not the kind of Universalist who assert that Jesus' work was to compel everybody to resurrect into heaven, whether they wanted it or not. Instead, the kind of Universalist who believes that Jesus made things so that everybody gets resurrected, everybody gets brought to consciousness forever, and afterwards, for most of them, their eternal life will be one of inescapable and ultimate misery. Both universalisms are wrong. Resurrection is a choice and heaven too is a choice, therefore neither is for everyone. Why is that so hard to grasp? And why are self-identified Christians so stubborn in refusing to grasp the good news, or, worse, insisting that they do not even want it? Old age is wasted on the old. Francis Berger. Youth is wasted on the young. Everyone has heard the phrase and understands what it expresses. The seemingly limitless vitality, energy, vigor, time, curiosity, bravado, and optimism inherent in a stage of life are also tainted by a glaring failure to capitalize on those attributes due to a lack of experience and wisdom, resulting in squandered opportunities, misguided pursuits, and wasted time. Although I acknowledge the general truth within the expression, I don't like it much. Those who utter the expression rarely, if ever, wish to communicate anything spiritual. Thus, the phrase comes off as too cynical, too regret-infused, too this-worldly, and too hedonistic in focus. There's also the whole obsession with youth, but I won't go into that here. How about this instead? Old age is wasted on the old. Now there's a phrase that could offer immense spiritual benefit to many, provided they sincerely consider the spiritual implications. Do I know when somebody is reading my mind? Bruce Charlton. We are born with secure knowledge that we are not alone but inhabit a universe of other beings, some like ourselves, some different. This knowledge is built in, not a product of experience, which might, after all, be misinterpreted or delusional. This built-inness is why the existence of other minds cannot be proved, and why solipsism cannot be refuted. The same applies to the existence of God/s, spirits, life persisting beyond death, etc. All built in. This innate knowledge of the existence of other beings, other minds, suggests that there is a background and mutual knowledge that we are in touch with others, on the basis that if we are aware of other minds, then other minds must be aware of us. So, it seems likely that we cannot know another being's thoughts without that being also knowing that we know, but we moderns are only seldom aware, perhaps for some moderns never aware, that we do know of the existence of other minds. Awareness of others forms a kind of unconscious background to our lives, something like an ocean of unconscious mutual which we inhabit and largely take for granted. This picture would fit with the idea that the direct, i.e. not mediated by perceptual awareness of other remote persons, i.e. persons beyond sensory contact, is real but unconscious. Which implies that although few, modern, people seem ever to be aware of their minds being read, this is actually happening, but is either not conscious, or our consciousness of this is denied because it makes no sense on the basis of modern metaphysical materialist assumptions. Therefore the answer to "do I know when somebody is reading my mind?" is yes, you do know, but you are, probably, seldom, or never, aware of this knowledge. A further implication is that, since our minds actually are being read, just as we actually are reading the minds of other human beings, and other beings, it is also plausible we might become aware of this innate, direct mutual contact between our own mind and the minds of others. Become aware, that is, if we want to become aware, and if our basic, metaphysical, assumptions concerning ultimate reality allow for the reality of mind reading. In other words, telepathy is real. Personal development, is it a good thing? Analogy with development in the arts and literature. Bruce Charlton. In the early 1970s, it was a standard aesthetic criterion that development was a good thing, a necessary thing, and that the developed was better. I first came across it in pop music. For example, the idea that the Beatles were good because their music developed, from album to another, the style and subject matter changed, and later Beatles was better than earlier. Anyone who thought the opposite, and preferred their early stuff, was shallow, simple-minded, dumb. Same in classical music, as I later discovered. The great composers all, supposedly, developed, and all kept on getting better. Critics seemed unanimous that middle-period Beethoven was better than early, with which most lay people agreed, and best of all were his latest works, especially the last string quartets, with which the music-loving public certainly disagreed. The same applied across the board really, whether in other arts and literature, or in intellectual pursuits, and even in the spiritual realm. C.G. Jung's most influential concept was perhaps the desirability of personal development as the proper goal of human life. Through the middle and late 20th century this ideal became almost a new religion. So what was this development that was so good? The direction of desirable development was, nearly, always towards less immediate appeal, more serious/less fun, or funny, longer, more complex, more difficult. Those qualities that had initially attracted people to, say, the Beatles or Beethoven and which brought them to notice, popularity, high status, were thereby downgraded. In particular that rather indefinable quality of freshness that characterizes early work and accounts for its immediacy of appeal, that unself-conscious spontaneity and fluidity, the absence of that striving, effort, and contrivance which typically dominates later, more serious/complex/lengthy etc. work. That naturalness of expression and clarity of achievement was looked down upon, together with the responses that went with it, such as laughter, instead of sophisticated wit. In an overall sense, it was hard for an honest observer to conclude that development meant better, because the developed was almost a different thing altogether. Indeed, literally so in the case of developments in modern art and architecture, and modern classical music, where the developed was often unrecognizable in terms of the aims and virtues and appeal of the starting point. What about personal development? Well, the analogy seems close. The direction of personal development was towards self-consciousness, seriousness, effort and control, a balancing and integration of multiple complexities, by means of complex theories and learned practices. This can be linked back to the development of personality in religion, where a similar trajectory was recommended and observed. There was little doubt that people could be, usually were, changed by prolonged religious training, increased knowledge, study, and practices, and these differences were of the same sort as seen in the arts. But whether that differentness from his starting condition actually made the person better in any kind of overall or basic sense was very debatable. Often enough it made them worse. This is where we now stand, at the end of an era in which development was the ideal, and its benefits were assumed, to one in which such claims are seen to be a false generalization, and often self-serving. But men cannot live without purpose. And if development is discarded, then it must be, indeed, it will be, replaced with some other ideal, even if that ideal is implicit, unconscious, denied. If we cannot truly develop in any genuinely religious or spiritual fashion, then what should we be doing, aiming at, instead? As usual, the necessary first step to finding an answer is to acknowledge the question. Jesus wept, the difference between non-duality and Christianity. William Wildblood. This is a follow-up to the previous post which stated that Christ can operate through avenues other than mainstream Christianity. This is because Christ is not only the historical Jesus. He is also the eternal or archetypal pattern of divine truth which can appear wherever a form is open to it. In fact, this inner Christ is more spiritually important than the historical Jesus, though it was fully present in him and best revealed in him. What this also means is that to be a Christian in the proper sense and not just a believer requires that you allow Christ to be born in the heart and so live in the same divine truth he does, though note that Christ does not just live in this divine truth as anyone might. It is grounded in his being, so while we can share in it, he is it and it is him. The Spirit of Christ can overshadow any religious approach that is open to it. That is not to say it operates equally well in any religion, but if there is something in the soul of an individual that accords with the reality of Christ, then that individual can find something in most religions that will develop that connection to some degree. We must accept this if we make an unbiased study of non-Christian religions and realize that all of them have their share of genuine holy people. However, this fact has led some people to draw the conclusion that all religions are essentially the same with the same ultimate goal. When we encounter other religious traditions and see that they are authentic guides to spiritual transcendence and do contain significant numbers of saints and sages, it is logical to assume they must simply be different ways of describing the same thing. This was the conclusion drawn by the group known as perennialists. It can be hard to argue against this conclusion, and yet I was never comfortable with it because of the obvious uniqueness of Jesus Christ, who cannot be reduced to just another enlightened soul or even avatar. You cannot escape what Christ said about himself, or that he was the one human being genuinely without sin or stain and the absolute incarnation of goodness and truth in a way that no other person, alive or dead, comes near. This is clear from the Gospels and brought out by meditation on his holy image. The perennialists thought that all religions in their higher aspects led to the same goal, but to reach this conclusion they had to set aside much of what Jesus taught. Specifically, he did not teach the extinction of the self as in nirvana, which is the Indian way. I am aware it is not the only Indian way, but it is the way usually regarded as the summation of the spiritual path by all those who teach the universality of religion. Everything is subsumed into the one in which the human does not survive. As far as this path is concerned, the individual self is the barrier to truth and must be killed, conquered or transcended. It makes no odds how you express it. The self must go. Now, this is a real path and does lead to a form of God when the end is attained, though that is extremely rare, especially in our day, even though there are many claimants to the title, people who may have had a taste of the non-dualistic state but who are not fully established in it. However, the God it reaches is not the personal God of Christianity. Absorption into impersonal pure being is seen as a step beyond the personal God, but what if the reverse were the case? What if everything comes from the personal I am and the impersonal is part of the stuff from which God creates consciousness, his spirit but not his self? This would be the Christian position, even if Christians unaware of esoteric teachings might not understand it in this way, as they do not have the linguistic and philosophical tools to do so. To support this idea, consider the fact that pure impersonal being as ultimate reality could not give rise to an I unless that I was already there in some form. It is the I that comes first, as, indeed, it does in language when we say I am. The person comes before impersonal being, which shows there is a profound difference between union with the transcendent God and oneness with immanent being. The non-dualistic Eastern religions, and the Christian religion both lead to a form of God, but it is not the same divine form. The Eastern way concludes in nirvana, in which the individual is dissolved, while the Christian way leads in salvation, where the individual is sanctified rather than expunged from existence. The Christian disciple still has to transcend the ego aspect of the soul, the separative sense, but individuality is a gift from God. The Christian way is to return it to God, who then gives it back filled with His grace and His Spirit. Thus, we can see that the traditionalist idea of the transcendent unity of religions is based on a metaphysical error, the assumption that all religions are subsumed in a type of Buddhism in which the I is transcended and left behind as nothing. But non-dualistic religions and Christianity aim at two very different destinations, and while non-dualists would claim that salvation belongs to the relative world because it is still part of Maya or creation, and their goal is the absolute, the truth is that salvation, properly understood, is greater because it includes both the absolute and the relative. It has everything of the peace and bliss and oneness of the non-dualistic state, but it also incorporates love, beauty and goodness which belong to the world of created beings. God did not create man simply to reabsorb him into himself. He did so to watch his children grow up to become God-like themselves. Non-dualistic religion has no understanding of creation or growth or judgment or purpose or even, really, love. For it, time is an illusion rather than a means to grow and a path to an end which is better than the beginning. But if creation has no purpose, what is it there for? Why go through all that stress and strain just to go back to the beginning with nothing added? If you talk to a non-dualist about sin or the fall, he will not understand, or else he will reframe those things in terms he does understand but that robs them of their meaning. They are more than just ignorance. They relate to a malfunctioning of the will, which is where the self is situated, and they mean that good and evil are real things between which there is a battle from which you cannot just turn away by denying its reality. The non-dualist would say only God is real, but precisely because God is absolute reality, what he creates is also real. Not as real as him, because it has dependent being, but it is still fully real, and that means that good and evil are not just illusions. They are part of reality as it exists for the individual. Since the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, a new goal has opened for humanity, one that leads to the divinization of the self rather than its destruction. This new goal does not make merging into the one obsolete, but that does now become the lesser option, a truth which the non-dualist would reject, failing to understand that times have changed since the Vedas were revealed and the Buddha preached. More is on offer. It seems God has left the door to nirvana open, but I wonder if that is really so, or whether those who follow this path might have to return and be required to work out their salvation once more. Or else they might wish to once they realize what is on offer in the greater spiritual universe. Jesus wept because he shared in the suffering of Mary and Martha. For the non-dualist, that suffering is ultimately an illusion, and to weep would be to partake in that illusion. But for Jesus, Mary and Martha were real beings in themselves and not merely manifestations of the divine. The new spirituality brought by Christ did not aim to kill the self but to raise it up to eternal life. Yes, it must die to itself, but after that death it is resurrected in glory. Living a lie, is your bottom line reality a social institution? Bruce Charlton. The way things have been shaping over the past years, I think that the biggest spiritual challenge is related to social institutions, specifically the question of whether or not people, including you and I, as individuals, are going to root our fundamental understanding and support of reality in a social institution. It has in the past been normal, usual, spontaneous, unconscious, sometimes even mandatory, for people to root their sense of reality in a social institution, such as a church, or perhaps a tribe, or in recent generations a nation. The challenge of being an increasingly self-aware being in an increasingly obviously evil totalitarian society, is that we are now becoming aware of what this entails. It is no longer spontaneous and unconscious, instead people make a deliberate choice of the social institution/s in which they will invest their sense of reality. This immediately introduces a paradox, a contradiction. We choose where we invest objective reality, and this choosing of external objectivity is only psychologically effective when this choice can subsequently be hidden from ourselves. Hence we find ourselves in a world where almost everybody is dishonest with themselves concerning their most fundamental choices. Most people make ultimate choices about the nature of reality, and the authority for that nature. Then they pretend to /deny/forget that have made these choices. People continue to invest their ultimate reality in social institutions, continue to insist that this is where ultimate reality is indeed located, yet this assertion is based on falsehood, and when challenged this falsehood is absolutely insisted upon in a way that inevitably corrupts an inaccuracy to a lie. So people, that is almost everybody, is literally living a lie, a calculated untruthfulness, when it comes to what they regard as deepest and most important. And this corruption in action comes through to consciousness more and more obviously, with more and more people, as the months roll by. Note added, what lies behind the above, is my continued dismay at the falling away from spiritual commitment to divine creation, and then doubling down on fallenness, of more and more of the online people whose work I peruse. This, because these people stubbornly adhere to the primacy of some social institution, whether that be their chosen church, or their chosen spirituality, ideology, political affiliation, or whatever it might be. In particular, I am dismayed that, and this is my interpretation, they find themselves, although this is denied, supporting the functionality of the system, which is, I believe, intrinsically evil, on the correct basis their chosen bottom-line social institution depends on the functional continuation of the system. And because these folk are, naturally, afraid of the waxing influence of the agents of chaos, which they seem to suppose they can do something personally to stop and reverse, whether locally or globally. In other words, they are becoming more and more active spiritual supporters and sustainers of the materialist strategy of Ahriman, because of their fear of, and, pragmatic, desire materially to oppose the ever more destructive Sorithic powers. This lapsing into the Boromir strategy was something I predicted would happen several years ago, and I am sorry that I was so right about it. Gogol now surpassed by DDG, a microcosm of the 21st century technological trajectory. Bruce Charlton. For those too young to remember, the search engine that also hosts this blog and which I will therefore call Gogol, was launched in the late 1990s, and developed over the next years into one of the great engineering achievements of the millennial period. It was so good by 2004, serving up vast numbers of well-ranked and relevant results, up to millions, maybe billions of them, if you could be bothered to look, including in real time, showing results, additively, tens of seconds after pages were posted onto the web, that other search engines were irrelevant. The Gogol incrementally ceased to be optimized for searching, and, which, presumably, had always been the intention, became orientated first to making money, then to surveillance and ideological control. Features were stripped out, such as real-time searching, relevance ranking, then results became filtered. And now it serves up very few pages at all, a few dozen, at most a couple of hundred. Nowadays the results are full of stuff like Facebook and Instagram pages, such that the search results do not even lead to the actual results, do not lead to the sampled passages. So good had been Gogol that it took a long time before any of the supposed rivals to equal or surpass it in the primary function of web searching and ranking. But for the past year plus, the point has been reached when I am convinced that Gogol has so degraded itself that other algorithms, which used to be qualitatively inferior, are now actually much superior in terms of generating relevant results, for instance DDG. This is a microcosm of the trajectory of Western civilization through the 20th century. As real science became all but extinct, technological progress slowed, then, overall, ceased, then went into reverse, as functionality was first sacrificed, then ignored, in pursuit of totalitarian socio-political mass manipulation. So-called AI has accelerated the process, is indeed a key element in the process, since its core net intent was, from the beginning, civilizationally destructive. And the widespread welcoming of AI is evidence of the success of the long-term plan, which was always and ultimately spiritual, not material. For the spiritual agenda to succeed, people must want their own spiritual enslavement, their own value degradation. People must be induced willingly to blind themselves to the motivation and consequences of post-millennial technology. Job done. What we ought to do is simple, and within the capacity of literally everybody in all circumstances. And that is to realize and acknowledge the evil intent behind all of the totalitarian-backed technologies, including not just AI, but professional science and research, institutional reforms, EVs, sustainable energies, the Birdemic PEC, establishment-backed medical campaigns. The whole caboodle. And inwardly, with heartfelt motivation, decisively reject that intent. But, apparently, this little and simple action is just too much to ask. It is fact, not merely opinion, that supporters of AI are supporting global totalitarian materialism's core project. Bruce Charlton. It is a simple fact that the supporters of AI are thereby supporting global totalitarianism's core project, and the project that the totalitarians have been, and currently are, expending more resources and money upon, than any other of their strategies of evil. Supporting AI is therefore rational and consistent if you personally share in the goals of materialist totalitarianism, i.e. the goals and methods and understanding of good represented by the architects and implementers of Agenda 2023 and the Great Reset. But otherwise, for example, if you identify as Christian, or if you believe you oppose the establishment or favor freedom, then you personally are engaged in an incoherent, and probably self-serving, delusion. You may rationally justify embracing and propagandizing AI on the basis that global totalitarianism is a lesser evil than the mainstream alternative of universal mutual destruction favored by the agents of chaos. This is, I think, overall true. The selfish power-seeking materialist bureaucratic evil aimed at omni-surveillance and micro-control of others, is not as bad as a mastering spiteful desire for death and the destruction of divine creation, even when at the cost of self-harm. However, if you are honest, then such reasoning requires a frank admission that you are engaged in the Boromir strategy of trying to fight a greater evil by strengthening a lesser evil. In which case, if you regard honesty and coherence to be a necessity, you had better ensure that your own hands and conscience are as clean as whistles, ensure that you personally are neither likely, nor hoping, to benefit from the triumph of your preferred brand of evil. Or else you are yourself, objectively, one of them. The activist assumption, can we validly, by making wise lifestyle choices, fight the system, and work incrementally towards a Christian world? Bruce Charlton. Can we genuinely, by making wise and responsible lifestyle choices, fight the system, and thereby work incrementally towards a Christian world. The true and ultimate answer, the answer from Jesus Christ, is no, we cannot. Also, even if we could truly make a better this world by our choices, that would never be enough, that could never suffice. The situation of this world, as of here and now, is much worse than the question implies, because the question implicitly assumes there is some way that somebody can opt out of the evil of this world, that somebody can exist out with the system. I mean the very common notion that we essentially affiliate with either good or evil by our material actions, by our lifestyle choices, choosing the best from those available, for example by actions such as voting, buying, selling, joining, resigning, etc. This activist assumption is absolutely false, because based on false premises. The real question is qualitative, not quantitative, and all available and possible choices are evil complicit. It was, perhaps, nearly, always thus, but we need only consider the situation as of here and now. The global totalitarian system is evil by intent and design, and it is inescapable, and we all, every person, everywhere, depend on it for survival. Our actual situation is analogous to that of a chattel slave who lives or dies at the whim of an evil master. The qualitative choice is to be compelled to do what the master commands, or die. Yet a slave can be a Christian, and plenty have been, because, no matter what he is compelled to do in order to stay alive, the slave can choose to want salvation. And that is what matters decisively. The slave is only damned if he wants that which his evil master is telling him to want. The war of this world is a spiritual war. Therefore it is ultimately about attitudes, aims, desires, motives and such like. It is about what we inwardly affirm and what we inwardly reject. When we support an evil agenda, we have chosen to join with evil and its purposes. Actions may be compelled on pain of death, or suffering too great for our powers of resistance. But whatever the actions, it is that inner act of wanting that damns us, not our actions. In sum, the activist assumption is false, because it regards the core problem and task of life as being some version of how to make this world a better place. This is, and perhaps always has been, the commonest understanding of the purpose of life. But, for one who desires most to follow Jesus to resurrected eternal life, the core problem and task of life is different. The question is actually a subset of the Jesus versus Pharisee debates, the Pharisee assumption that sin is quantitative and thus something that can be avoided or usefully diminished by focusing on, and avoiding, a list of special sins. But the assumption of Jesus Christ is that qualitatively all men are sinners, e.a. all men fail ultimately and always to align our will with God and divine creation, and all men sin innumerable times in innumerable ways. For Christians, therefore, the proper question is not how to avoid sinning, but how to attain salvation, how to join the side of God and divine creation, despite that no man ever has, or ever will, avoid sinning frequently, and without any possibility of stopping. Note, this post is edited from my response to a question from commenter Jack Pixley. My way or the highway? Christian exclusivism, in relation to Christian claims of the necessity of Jesus Christ. Bruce Charlton. A lot of modern people are or claim to be averse to the exclusivism of Christianity. By exclusivism they usually refer to some particular self-identified Christian church, or denomination, or a selection of such churches. And by exclusivism is meant a collection of various ideas that limit salvation, for examples that Christianity is the only true religion, that church instructions and or sacraments provide the only valid path to salvation, that those who are not Christian are doomed to eternal torment, and so forth. Various alternatives may then be proposed for these and other various exclusivisms, for instance, that all religions are true, or equally true, that heaven is for everyone, eventually, that heaven is for good people, and others. All of these miss the point. Christianity is indeed exclusive, and exclusive in the sense that for those who want salvation, which is resurrected eternal life in heaven, there is only one way of attaining this goal. And that one way is by following Jesus Christ. In other words, Jesus Christ is necessary for salvation, meaning that if Jesus had not existed, and was not still alive and active, then there would be no salvation for any of mankind. Such a brief definition may be true and perhaps acknowledged by many or most Christians, yet it leaves some key terms undefined, in particular what it means to follow Jesus Christ. But the answer to that should, I believe, be regarded as secondary to the first step, which is to want what Jesus offers, to desire salvation for oneself, and to want it as the priority of life. I would say that anyone who wants salvation as the priority is a Christian. By that commitment is a Christian defined. The secondary question of what follow means in this context, and how, exactly, I personally, here and now, should follow Jesus Christ, well, such matters are surely more the subject for a life quest, than a thing that can be pre-decided by any act of faith and resolution. Even joining a church and obeying it does not decide what follow means in practice, since the church opinion must be learned, acted on, and anyway there is always dispute on such matters within all churches. Anyone who sincerely desires to attain eternal resurrected life in heaven will, presumably, do whatever is necessary for him to attain this goal, as and when this becomes evident, and will do so according to his own best attainable knowledge and understanding. Following Jesus is a matter about which it would seem foolish to expect unanimous agreement. The core of what Christianity is may, nonetheless, be a matter of shared consensus among Christians of many types, but only among Christians. Because, it seems that plenty of other people, apparently a large majority, do not want salvation but want something else instead, and there are many such possibilities. Therefore, it seems to me that almost all of the people who object to the real exclusivism of Christianity do not themselves want salvation. But, for instance, they might deny the real possibility of post-mortal life, or prefer some other post-mortal outcome than everlasting life in heaven. Perhaps they want reincarnation. Or not to die at all. Or for death to be annihilation of the self. Or they prefer eternal life as a spirit rather than to be resurrected bodily. Or they want a post-mortal pleasure paradise of themselves reborn, but not resurrected. Many possibilities exist, including the desire to become a ghost, or a demon, common enough wishes nowadays. So the exclusivism of Christianity is seldom a real problem. Those who themselves do not desire Christ's salvation, or who regard it as an unpleasant, bad or evil thing, can hardly object that such salvation is exclusive. And, although theoretically a possibility and a genuine problem, whether people actually exist who sincerely desire salvation, i.e. desire for themselves resurrected eternal life in heaven, and who also deny that Jesus is truly necessary to attain this salvation, is not clear to me. I guess that, if they indeed exist, such people would need to believe that 1. They wanted salvation. 2. There is a path to salvation. 3. But a path that does not require men to follow Jesus, in any sense of follow, i.e. that, contrary to what Christians assert, Jesus is not really necessary to salvation. Only if such people exist, then I can see that such would indeed have a legitimate grievance against the exclusivism of Christianity.